I rented both of these cameras and ran around with them for a little while, and the winner is just obvious. But it's not really a fair competition because the R10 costs more than $200 more than the R50. So what I have to do is prove to you why it's worth it. The most drastic differences between the two cameras really affect photographers. The R10 has a much more full body than the R50, which makes it way more comfortable to hold. There is something to be said for the smaller form factor of the R50 when it comes to travel, but it sacrifices room for more advanced controls. The R50 only has the index finger dial and the thumb pad for manual control, while the R10 has an additional programmable thumb wheel and a joystick, which can be used to adjust your camera settings on the fly or the location of your focus point, respectively. The R50 also lacks a dedicated controller input, which removes your ability to use third-party gear to get stuff like photo time lapses. I use a controller like this to take thumbnails, photos of myself all the time, because it's a lot easier if I'm way back here and I've got a controller with a wire and all that, and I can do that with the R10 because it has one of those dedicated inputs, but I can't really use the R50 for that whatsoever. On the software side, the R10 outperforms the R50 as well with better high-speed shooting. While both cameras shoot 15 frames per second, the R50 is limited to just a 1/2 second burst of that 15 frames, which gets you 7 shots before the camera needs to kind of take a break to cool down to process those images, and then it can shoot 7 more shots of the burst. With the R10, you get over 2.5 seconds of that burst, so over 30 shots, which is a massive difference, especially if you're even just an intermediate or hobbyist sports photographer or wildlife photographer. The R10 kind of blows the R50 out of the water. Aside from that stuff, the cameras produce the same quality images. I actually think they have exactly the same sensor in them from Canon, so really there's not much difference aside from the technicalities. They have an APS-C sensor, so you'll just have to remember that any of your lenses, like this 28mm lens, are going to receive a 1.6 times crop, so this is going to become a 48.8mm lens. So just something worth noting. Kind of a good thing if you like sports or animal photography, because you get a little bit more reach on these long lenses like the 70-200. For creators, the cameras are a little bit more similar. They both have that super important fully articulating flip out screen, which is absolutely imperative when it comes to vlogging and really any social media content creation. And those extra manual controls on the R10 that I was talking about in the photo section are really not as important to a typical content creator. The smaller and lighter form factor of the R50 might be preferable to some creators, but in the grand scheme, there's really not that big of a difference between these two cameras. So I'm not sure that really holds a lot of weight. Autofocus is equal and awesome on these cameras, which is really important when you're filming yourself, but both cameras suffer from that APS-C crop sensor because it makes it a lot harder to get that wide angle look that is kind of natural for YouTube, that most people are used to. That wide field of view is undeniably important when it comes to making your viewers feel like they are in a certain place with you. But in my experience, the most important way to bring your viewers into your scene is not through your focal length, but through music and sound effects, which is why I get all of my music and sound effects from today's video sponsor, Epidemic Sound. Epidemic Sound is an online library that contains tens of thousands of audio tracks created by world-class artists, all made available for you to use in your content totally restriction-free. New York City is one of the most unique places I've ever been, and this footage may look cool, but if I strip out the music and the sound effects, it's just pictures on a screen. That's the power of audio, and that is the power of Epidemic Sound. Whether you're feeling happy, sad, nervous, or any other emotion under the sun, Epidemic Sound has music that will convey those emotions to your audience, and they've compiled them all into playlists so it's easy for you to find the right track and to get back into editing as quickly as possible. I've been using Epidemic's music for years now, and I highly recommend them to anybody who's trying to up their creative game. The best part is you can try it out totally for free for a whole week by going through a link that I have in the description below. Thank you to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to talking about the R10. Videographers are going to seriously appreciate the larger body of the R10 because when you're filming for longer periods of time with heavier lenses, having a full handle on your camera is kind of imperative for getting smoother shots and for avoiding the worry of just accidentally losing grip on your gear and dropping it, destroying like thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Additionally, the HDMI port placement on the R50 is absolutely awful because it's right on the handle of the R50. So when you plug in an HDMI cable that goes to like a external monitor or recording device, that cable then removes your ability to hold the camera at that grip. The mic input for the R50 is on the other side, so when you've got both of these things plugged in, I have no earthly idea how you would hold this thing comfortably. The R10 has all these same ports, but they're all just on the one side so that you can hold the camera grip when you're filming. One of my biggest disappointments with the R50 is that it lacks the ability to shoot in 4K 60, which is absolutely imperative for any of my client productions. 4K 60 is 100% the standard that I use for B-roll. I shoot it all in at 60 frames per second slow motion. It's beautiful, it's smooth, and not having the ability to do that makes this practically impossible to use for any sort of client work. The R10 is still limited here in the 4K, but it does have 4K 60. You just have to deal with a pretty drastic crop in. I think it's like 1.8 times. That said, that's not really crippling to it because a lot of the time when I am shooting in 4K 60, it's just B-roll. And most of my B-roll I shoot in 50mm lens or with a 85mm lens because those are the more cinematic focal lengths, having that narrower field of view. So the crop in 4K 60 on the R10, while being kind of annoying, doesn't make it unusable. The R10 also handles overheating much better than the R50 by getting over an hour's worth of 4K 30 FPS footage versus the R50's like 35 minutes before it overheated. That's a massive difference. And as far as the 4K 60 goes, interestingly, there was no overheating in my test on the R10. I think that kind of has to do with the crop factor and it's not 6K binning anymore. It's a lot of technicality stuff, but I know from my test, no overheating in 4K 60. Unfortunately, neither camera films in any of Canon's log color spaces, which means that you're stuck with 10-bit footage and you lack the flexibility of the color correction for log and that dynamic range in post-production. They both downsample their 4K from their 6K sensors, which means that 4K is super sharp, and as far as image quality goes, I really can't tell much of a difference between these two because, again, I think they're exactly the same sensor. Honestly, I can't see much of a reason to buy the R50 over the R10 nowadays. Of course, budget is a consideration, and if that $200 is super impactful for you, then maybe the R50 is the way to go, but in general, I would just recommend saving up for a little while longer and getting the more professional, more feature-laden R10. I don't think you'll regret that. That doesn't mean that the R50 is a bad camera though. I mean, it's excellent for the price. And if budget is a really important concern for you, then you should watch this video where I go in depth on the R50. You might find it helpful.